Welcome. My name is Colleen Tauke and I'm the sewing specialist for Fons and Porter. In this Quilting Quickly tutorial, we're going to cover how to do a flip and sew method for two different projects from this issue. One called Stomp, which is kind of the boys' version of this quilt, and one called Tweet. What we're going to do is we're going to be working with 10-inch squares of pre-cut plush fabrics. Now for the number of squares you need and the accompanying fabric, you can visit our website for information on how to purchase this pattern. And that will give you the exact amounts for each of the two quilts. So we have 10-inch squares, but if you look behind me, you're not seeing 10-inch squares. We're going to be cutting them down and using a rectangle like this. The nice part about using the 10-inch squares is that you can have a piece from each of the fabrics in the line that all coordinate together and not have to go out and buy widths of all these fabrics and have leftover fabric. So this gives you a great way to work with variety and just the fabrics that you need. So we're going to use those 10-inch squares. You'd be cutting them into rectangles this size. But if I were to work with pieces that large in this sewing center, you wouldn't be able to see what I was doing. So I'm going to be working with 2/3 size. So my rectangles are going to look like this, just so that you can get an idea of the process. So yours will look like this. Mine are going to be just a little bit smaller. Okay, we're going to be working with a plush fabric, which is has a knit base, so it has some stretch to it. Now, in order to stabilize that stretch and have a nice outcome with your project, what we've devised is to go to the back side of your fabric and use a fusible, non-woven interfacing, and on one side it has kind of a bead where there's kind of a glue surface, and the other is a soft, smooth surface. And you can also buy this in pre-cut on a roll like this. So if you don't want to have to cut your own, you can purchase it on the roll. So what we're going to do is simply come in and cut lengths of this that we can adhere to the back side of our blocks in order to reduce the stretch. It seems like one more step, but I found that it gives you a very nice less stretch in your project. So I would simply cut pieces like this and adhere them to each of the sides using anywhere from a medium type iron temperature to and without steam. So adhere those, just follow the manufacturer's instructions for your interfacing product that you're using. If you want more information on that, you can go to our Sew Easy. It's called Sewing with Plush, and then that will give you more details there. So we go through all of your pieces, including the white bars, the long bars, and the small rectangles that go between blocks. Stabilize the edges of everything. Once you start sewing, you'll see why and be so happy that you did that process. So as you prepare those, then what you need to do is to create rows. And I have one prepared here and a second row. Now working with plush is a little different than quilting. We're going to be using 1/2 inch seam allowances. So put a post-it note near your sewing machine, 1/2 inch, not 1/4, and set your stitch length to, most machines default to a 2.0, go to a 3.0. The stitches get buried in this plush fabric so easily that if you do have to remove anything, it makes it more difficult, and if stitches are very close together, there's not much room for ease, so a little longer stitch length. The other thing is that when you are seaming along here, if I did not have these seamed at this point, and I was just putting the two layers together, because we have a lot to deal with the plush, it tends to want to ride one on top of the other, I would be putting at least 3 pins in this length, and if I were working with the pieces here, probably 4 or 5 pins. So every couple of inches you're going to want to put a pin to reduce that shift. Then go and put your walking foot on your sewing machine. This is going to help bring both layers through the needle at the same time and not push one ahead of the other. Because even if it's stabilized, you will kind of see that you could get anywhere from 1/4 to a 1/2 inch slip because of the slickness of these pieces. So once you've got that stitched, then go in with your iron And with quilting, we usually press seam allowances to one side, but you would notice that these would be really thick seam allowances if they were all pressed in one direction. So we're pressing them open, and these were pressed really lightly. I didn't have to put a lot of pressure on the iron. It just kind of falls open, and see how nicely they lay without having to do much work. So we've got those created, and those are similar to the columns you see behind me, just in smaller scale. So you have those white bars between each. The next thing we're going to do is you're going to be working with the long strips that go down between your columns, and those are also have stabilizer on them. So you're going to have all those bars, everything stabilized, the columns like this put together. Now, I said quilt as you go at the beginning of this tutorial. So instead of having to quilt it after you create the top, we're going to create the entire thing and have it done to all the way out to the binding when we're complete. So this is the step we're going to do. You would take your backing fabric. Now, one little tip, working with plush creates a lot of lint. Keep a lint roller nearby because you're going to need it. Every time you make a cut on there, on the fabric, it creates lint. So if you have your lint roller nearby, it's a great tool to have in your sewing space. Now, here I have selected a piece of backing fabric, a simple green check. I've got a piece of batting that's go according to the size that's listed for your pattern. This again is a smaller scale. Then I've come in with a chalk liner, and I've measured to the center of my batting in each direction and made a line, a registration line, vertically and horizontally, and I used a long ruler to do that. So what we need to do is find the crosshairs, where to start. Then we take, and I have used a simple spray-based product like this to adhere the batting and the backing just lightly together, smooth that all out. Then you're going to center your first bar, because there's 3 bars, pieced bars in each of these quilts. You would find the center of, it has to be right in the middle of this white bar, the center of the length, and the middle. And you can measure, you would use a ruler to make sure that you get this position just correctly so that it's halfway in between here and we're at the halfway mark here. This is where the first bar is going to lay. Now, I would come in with just a light mist of spray-based, and I will show just a light amount to adhere this in place, and I would do that all the way down to get that to stay put. Then I come in with a sashing bar that I have stabilized, and that needs to go one on one side and one on the other, like this. Now you're starting to see the quilt start to develop. What we need to do is put those plushes right sides together, and you can see I gave myself even little sticky dots. Great way to keep yourself organized when you're cutting, because between sashing pieces and border pieces, you've got everything cut to size, and you don't want to have to go back and remeasure every time and rehandle it. So little dots or post-it notes are a great way to keep yourself organized. Put these right sides together, and then you're going to come in and you're going to pin through all layers. And again, you're going to have to pin fairly close because the plush has some shift to it. But because we are going to be sewing down through all of this, we're going to consider that quilt as you go, because when we're done, we'll have quilting lines holding our pieces together. And I'm going to stitch just part of one of these sashing strips just so you can see how that works. Now I've set up my iron or my sewing machine with the presser foot, longer stitch like I talked about. Got the walking foot in there. And now remember 1/2 inch seams. Remember we talked about 1/2 inch seams. And if your presser foot for your walking foot has notches along the front, or you can go in and figure out from where the needle comes down to the right where 1/2 inch is, and I just made a little tiny little mark on the end of my foot with a marker so that I will be aware, remembering 1/2 inch seam allowance. Otherwise your quilt's going to grow, and it's very hard to sew close to the edge on the plush. So I'm going to just make progress down through all those layers. And nothing's shifting, nothing's stretching. It makes it, actually sewing with the plush, not a problem. You're going to think that you're sewing on regular cotton. And I'm using red thread here. You would be using a matching, a white, or maybe even a lime green if you want the stitching on the back of the quilt to show. Okay, so you can see how that 1/2 inch seam allowance there, see how nothing stretched, it stayed even with the top of that bar, and it will do the same thing all the way down as long as you have your walking foot on your machine. Now, here we can't open seam allowances and divide, so we're going to be taking and putting them all in one direction, like this. Now I have that actually quilted through. We'll show you to the back. There's my quilting line, so everything's stable. And if I had this one all in place, I would be taking another bar, pieced section like this, and I would be putting it right sides together, pinning it. You can even see that the rows will match up across the way, so nothing is stretched out of place. Pin along here and do the exact same method, stitch and flip, a lot of times it's called. Okay, so that's the basis for the center of the quilt. You'll be repeating that process when you come out to the borders, and there's a bottom border here. Top and bottom border would go on first, and then the outer borders on this one. This one has 2 borders. It has an inner white border and this wonderful owl print on the outside. So it's the same stitch and flip type technique throughout. Now when it comes to the binding on plush is a little different. They're cut differently, they're handled differently, and we have a Sew Easy called Binding with Plush. So we won't overwhelm you while you're trying to work on the center of your quilt. Go to that tutorial to see how to bind with plush. For more of our tutorials, visit our website. Thanks for joining me today.